here's that awkward bit where nobody's on because I've just gone live. So if you're watching this on catch up and there's a lot of pausing and me not talking, well, that's because no one's on just yet. I've just come live and I'm waiting. In fact, I'm fractionally early, so I may be waiting a while. Anyway, welcome to the third part of the Radetzky March read-along. We've been enjoying that. We're going through chapters 12 to 16 in this episode, although I did cover, by mistake, chapter 12 last week. So I'll be focusing primarily on 13 to 16. I mean, I made the schedule and I still can't remember the chapters I'm supposed to be reading. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to wait for some people to log in. And if no one does, I will just give a discourse on those chapters and the things that I've noticed from them. So if you're watching on catch up, I'm going to sit quiet for a while. So just slide the bar along, skip forward. It might be 7 or 8 minutes, like at 7 or 8 minutes, that's probably when I'll start talking. Oh, actually, we've got the artsy tiger. Dad, I'm here. Hello, artsy tiger. Oh, now we've got 3 people. So welcome in numbers 2 and 3. Now we're down to 2. Who have we got? If you want to leave your name as you come in and tell me where you're from. Hello, everybody tuning in. Thanks for the like, whoever did that. Hello, number 5, you're in. Feel free to just type out who you are and say hello, which would be great. Oh, everyone's clocking on now. This is good. For the past minute, I've been... Hello, Pauline. How are you doing in Australia? I love the fact that you say good morning. What's this good evening over here, the other side of the world? Hello, Marianne Carl. Great to have you back with us. Enjoyed your research, Pauline, that you left in the Instagram chat. That was really good, actually. Thoroughly enjoyed that. You're just awake. Sorry. It's the juice of a thing trying to find a time to do a live for everybody, because we have people from America, Australia, Europe, and of course in Europe, Britain's pretty much the earliest hour because we're right on the west. And then there's some from India and Thailand and North Africa. So trying to find an hour that fits everybody is, yeah, not the easiest thing I've ever done in my life. 7 a.m. Oh, goodness me. No, that's hard. Taylor, hello. And good evening to you from Britain. It's nice to have you from Canada with us. That's cracking. I hope you're all ready for this lovely read along. By the way, as you know, I'll be leaving it a few more minutes before we start because it gives time for people to get in. Because it's nice if they can join us from the beginning with the live. Although I know plenty will come in halfway through or some afterwards to watch the whole lot. Just a reminder, feel free at any point, even if it takes you a while to type. Oh, Jenny. Any updates on the March Classics book choice? Hello, Matcha from Switzerland. Great to have you back with us. So, Jenny, updates on the March Classics book choice. There actually is, but I'm not sure whether to announce it now. I'm actually making a video to actually release the good news, and that will release tomorrow. So that we've got, I think, 7 or 8 days, then 8 days before we actually kick it off. It's very exciting. I thank all you guys that have been with me through this Radetzky March read along. It's helping me find my way. There's, for next week as well, the last Radetzky read along, we'll stick to this format. And then for the I know it is exciting, isn't it? I really want to tell you now, but I can't. Also, as part of this video that's releasing tomorrow, hopefully, I've got a new introduction for my channel. Very, very tidy little intro spiel, which you'll see on every video from now on my channel. But thank you all for helping me design this, for getting the Classics Book Club launched. It's thanks to you guys that we're doing it, because you came up with the idea. You know, I was asked a lot to do it. And I'll be adding a proper forum for discussing the next book. I almost said what it was then, but I can't say it. So there'll be a proper forum. I'll give updates later about it, but I can tell you guys now. On that forum, obviously I can't monitor it all the time, because this is a huge amount of work, reading and analysing and putting all this together, get my thoughts ready, while I've also got like 2 children and work and health issues to contend with as well. So that forum will be up there for all book lovers, and I will pop in every now and then through the week, but everyone can get engaged and ask questions. I'm going to be leaving questions that one can consider through the book as we go, and hopefully get discussion going. And then everyone can just sort of talk amongst themselves. I'll take up some of those points, and then there'll be a weekly bit where I'll come on and do this kind of thing. And hopefully with the first book club read along, hopefully I'm going to try and at the end of the month do a special video, where maybe on Zoom, where there can actually be a discussion, and we'll see how that goes. Let's hope it's not a debacle. But we all learn together as we go, and it's great to create a classics community that sucks the marrow out of these books and gets more than just skipping lightly along the surface, but really chewing it over. Right, I'm going to give it maybe a minute and a half now, and then we'll kick off, to use a sporting term. Hello, sweet journaling. How are you? Oh, hello, Lou G. Nice of you to welcome everybody as well. Where are you from, Lou? I know who Sweet Journaling is. Sweet Journaling's my wife. She does lots of scrapbooking, and Sweet Journaling has a YouTube channel. And if you like scrapbooking and that stuff, she is amazing. Memphis, Tennessee. Oh, well, thanks for telling us. Or should I say, being from there, thank you very much. It is Memphis that Elvis was from, wasn't it? Yeah, Graceland. Sorry to embarrass you, my lovely wife. Right, okay. I think we are... Oh, look at that. I'll put my notes. Excuse the extreme close-up. I've got to grab my notes. Right. So, how did you get on with this week's section of the wonderful Radetzky March? Are you enjoying it? I really am. I am thoroughly enjoying Roth's writing style. And the further along that we go, the more and more I'm appreciating about his development of this story, and some little insights coming in, which I sense were even a surprise to Roth himself when writing this. And like I say, just before we carry on, if you've got anything you want to say, just type it out, and most of the times I'll read it out while we're going along. I'll interrupt my own thoughts and read what you've written. And if you struggle with typing and you think, oh, it takes too long for me to type, don't worry about that. Just type along as you're listening and say whatever you want to say, because I'm interested in your thoughts too, because you've all contributed a lot as we've gone through this. So, the reading was from chapters 12 to 16. And by mistake, I did chapter 12 last week. In fact, I spent quite a bit of time on it. And, you know, I'm the one that wrote the itinerary, which is a bit of a shame I didn't follow it. So because I spent so long on the gambling side of things last week and the significance of that, I thought we'd just move straight on to chapter 13. Now, this was, ooh, this book, suddenly we've already got the built up idea of a decaying empire, and almost as a parallel to that, we have the Trotter family, who the first one's the hero of Solferino, and then his son Franz, the bureaucrat, and then Karl Joseph, who's just lost, but now part of the infantry. And it parallels sort of this decaying of the empire. It's a lovely story of just the inner feelings of people and life, but it's got a deliberate nostalgia to it. And what I found from 13 onwards, I don't know about you, was Roth seems to, he goes through a bunch of sort of vignettes from 13, 14, 15 and 16 through the eyes of different people, and you can see very, very much Roth beginning to insert his own recollections of the empire that he grew up in. Karl Joseph sort of almost becomes the mouthpiece now for Roth's own inner thinking, because he's writing in 1932, looking back. He's been disenfranchised from his fatherland because Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsed after World War One, actually partway through World War One. And you can see this reminiscence that is taking place. But he's also, because he's thinking it over during a story, and this is one of the things great classics do, the story will often take over the author, and it will begin to lead him and move him. Now for this, the characters are still sort of shadows of his own mind, but it's like it's working itself out through his thoughts. And he's got observations on how life should be lived, the smallness of us in life by comparison to everything, the inevitability of the doom of the empire, the scary nature of a future world which is unknown. There is an explicit reference to that in chapter 15. And also he's got a, what's the word? Again, a parallelism. An allegorical character. The personification of Austria turns up in chapter 13. Did anyone else, you can just say yes or no or maybe, did anyone else notice the similarity or the potential symbolism of Frau von Tausig, this woman who suddenly appears in chapter 13, as being a symbol of the dual monarchy, Austro-Hungaria? Did anyone else notice that? I'll just read, if you've got your book, get it out. Chapter 13, the very first line. Introducing us. Hello, Marion. Lovely to have you with us again. Have you been reading the Radetzky then? Have you caught up with us? We're on chapters 12 to 16. We're just looking at the very first sentence. It says there, Frau von Tausig was beautiful and no longer young. Now, one of the things when analysing literature is understanding or taking a look at style, taking a look at choice of words, trying to comprehend why an author would choose to, in this case, introduce a character in certain terms. He could have gone in for Frau von Tausig was a dark-haired beauty, curling hair. He could have described her apparel. He could have described her family lineage. There's many ways. He could have described the weather when she came in, because let's face it, he's picked the weather a number of times in this book to set his feel, his environment. But with this, he says Frau Tausig was beautiful and no longer young. And that gives a hint, perhaps, to the fact that she's symbolic of Austro-Hungaria. Because when we think, oh, you took it at face value. Well, that's not anything bad to do, actually, because there is a very good point, actually, that you bring up here, Pauline. There is a danger with symbolism that you can read into a book far too much than the author meant to put there. However, my antenna went up as soon as I thought, why would you introduce somebody like that specifically? And as I carried on reading, and as maybe you'll see, maybe you'll agree with me, and by the way, you can disagree with me, Books are not solid things on which to stake your flag and be belligerent against any other opinion. Books influence us a lot through our own ideas, our own experiences in the world, but trying to detach yourself, like a good author should try to detach themselves from the story and let the story speak for itself rather than moralize and interject. A good reader, try and stand in the book and let the book talk to you, reveal itself, rather than approaching the book with an idea that you're going to force into it, which is probably the biggest problem with modern criticism today. When you go into something saying, I am going to do a social Marxist critique of this book, well, you're going to find Marxism in the book, whether the author meant it or not. Just stand in the book, let it talk to you. But ask yourself, am I hearing the voice of the author here? Because we get to share their experiences. We get to debate and discuss with them what life means if we can understand or sense they're coming from a place. So back to Frau von Tausig. Beautiful and no longer young. Let's think. Whenever he's talked reminiscently, whenever the Austro-Hungarian Empire is brought up, particularly on the military side, it's colourful. In fact, what's it called? The Radetzky March. This pomp, this ceremony. It is beautiful, but it is no longer young. It has lost its vibrancy, and the younger generation are moving on, as we've seen already, but becomes explicitly stated in these chapters that we read this week. She's been married twice. Don't you find that interesting? It's on its own means nothing, but remembering if she could be symbolic of the empire, it's a dual empire. There's a certain hint towards ceremony and tradition in who she married, and also in modernity and money, which is quite interesting because they were rich, but they were decaying badly. And that's how it starts. Now, if I look down, it's because I've written my notes to be a little more coherent as we go along rather than just rambling. So, on the next page, so even if you haven't got this, I will try to help you find what I'm reading. So, one paragraph, 2, 3, I think it's the third paragraph. It says, and so the widow married the periodically demented Tausig, this is her new husband. She needed money, and he was less trouble than a baby. Now, again, why could that be significant? Well, Austro-Hungaria people are climbing up in the pecking order, in the aristocracy in particular. They're holding on to the power, the regalia, the pomp. For those right at the top, the empire can mean something. Periodically demented. It's great, isn't it? He's in and out of an asylum. But she picks this husband because he is less trouble than a baby. She can manipulate him. Now, I don't know what you know about him, but think of who the Emperor of Austro-Hungary is. It's Franz Joseph, and he was not a strong individual. We see him first in a battle that leads to defeat. I think that was his first major battle in his career. But he was known to be able to be manipulated. He was thought of in real history as not being the brightest spark, and could be easily swayed or even ignored by those of his cabinet around him. They could use him almost like a blank check to pass their bills. Now, he did notice things, but he wasn't the most vigorous of the breed of Habsburg. I mean, if you think of Maria Therese, the old Empress of Austro-Hungary, and her daughter Marie Antoinette, these are vicious, bulldogs of characters. That's not Franz Joseph. So just the husband she's married suggests also that Tausig is this Austrian empire. And other little things start feeding into that, because she meets up with Karl Joseph. And it's the way it's set up. It's not that Karl Joseph makes a move on her. She makes the move on him. And it describes her. It says she walked into every one of her so-called adventures with eyes tightly shut. And with her own need, she transfigured the foolish men for her use, unfortunately, they failed to notice. Now, it's mentioned here, she has a desire for Karl Joseph Trotter, and she gets him very quickly ensnared. But he's not the first young one. She says actually that she had had a previous passion for a Lieutenant Evold 10 years previously, on the same piece of track in the same compartment of the train. So basically, she consumes the young. She has a lust for the young blood, for the young's power, for the admiration of the young, and she uses them to elevate herself. Now, what does the Austro-Hungarian Empire, what's it been doing through the whole book? It's been consuming the young. It's you could say oppressive, but it's more a repressive state that it's got into now. It was beautiful, but it's no longer young, and in its decay it's clinging on to the young, holding them enthralled to its whim. And often through the pomp, the ceremony, the military, the ideal that they're taught through the stories at the beginning of their childhood, they are seduced into this relationship. But what I found very interesting pertaining to Frau von Tausig and their little liaison on the train was she kept calling Trotter my child, my child. And while she's got his attention, she feels no longer afraid of her age. But she is conscious of it at times, because she sometimes tells him, I'm much older than you. And it says that she pulls him in as her lover, but feels towards him like his mother, which is pretty grim, to be quite honest. So that tells you sort of Austro-Hungary's attitude towards its young men, the upcoming generations under its auspices. It wants them to hold up its power, to make it feel great. But it also gave birth to them for that reason. And that's sort of an unnatural relationship. And just like the fathers and sons are stymied by, let's see, the idea of letting a book speak to you reminds us of how and why some novels transcend time so well. The great classics often facilitate the growth and interplay of our own experiences. Absolutely brilliantly put, Taylor. Thank you very much. If you didn't catch that, after this, go back to 22 minutes, 40 seconds, and you will see that comment. So, where was I? Yeah, so the men and the boys, the fathers and the sons, they've got this strained relationship where the done thing, etiquette, form, propriety has hampered them. But this here shows that the empire as mistress of all people's lives has got a very perverse relationship with those whom it is mothered, and yet needs them as lovers. So that was an interesting take. So something interesting. We're not finished with Frau von Tausig, by no means. I haven't read the rest of the book, but she's going to come up again and have a powerful relationship with Karl Joseph. It's interesting that he is trying to find love and attachment. Now, translating that, I would imagine this is Roth talking. He had a love affair with the old empire. It was where he was born, and he feels it like that. He loves what it stood for, its beauty, but it was also his mother. But it never treated him like a mother. It never really took care of its young. And you sense the sort of forlornness in Trotter as he goes through this. And yet, here's the big thing, tying Frau Tausig to the Austrian Empire. What did you think of the brilliant writing of the parade? He goes to Vienna, he's with Frau Tausig, and she gets them seats in the grandstand because she's important. And it talks about the parade passing by, and there's so much in there. What does it say about Karl Joseph? He thrilled listening to the Radetzky March, the anthem of the empire, the pinnacle ideal, the icon, to speak religiously. It's like the great psalm of the empire. It draws everyone who wants to believe in it together, and it gives them a momentary belief, a passion. Oh, hello, Elegant Couples Book Review. Oh, lovely to see you, and that's very good about psychoanalysis. Wow, very deep. By the way, the Elegant Couples Book Review is an excellent channel if you like digging into the classics as well, so go over and give them a follow and a like. They work really hard and they deserve more followers. So he thrills at the Radetzky, this psalm, this anthem to Austria. But what's interesting about the woman he's with, Frau von Tausig, it says, the cheerful pomp of the parade projected its warm and rejuvenating glow on her. And it says from her youth she'd been familiar with it. Well, from its youth, its inception, the Habsburg monarchy was pretty much militaristic. But notice how she's beautiful but no longer young, and yet when she sees and watches this military parade, it projects its glow, its rejuvenation, its youthfulness onto her. Again, linking Frau Tausig symbolically with the empire itself. And this is the thing, Joseph feels great to be with her, Karl Joseph, but also he feels uplifted when he's in the presence of the catechism of empire, which is its parades, its marches. It talks about all the different colours. It talks about the dappled grey horses and the prime white horses, and the Bosnians in their brown jackets and blue trousers, and the Uhlans, which are the lancers, a famed cavalry amongst the Habsburg army. All of these are going by, and it lifts up the swell of pride in Karl Joseph's chest, and it rejuvenates the older Frau Tausig. And at this point, he makes a comment after all of the passing by, where he says that the vultures were already circling above the Habsburg double eagle. That's the eagle on its flag. But he then says, no, the world wasn't doomed. Whatever Koźnicki said, you could see with your own eyes how alive it was. Now, Koźnicki, as we know, came in last chapter, chapter 12, and he's the count, and he speaks quite openly to everybody that the Austro-Hungarian Empire is doomed. We haven't got a strong army. If we do have a war, we're going to lose. And people are breaking away, and the different nationalities want their own rulership. And he says it's doomed to end. And he even says that to Franz, Karl Joseph's dad, who is taken aback by it, but he's troubled because he actually senses he's telling the truth. But when seeing a military parade, how does Karl Joseph feel? He says, no, it's not doomed. Whatever Koźnicki said, you can see with your own eyes how alive it was. The veneer of pomp and ceremony, marches, armies passing by. When you've got all that grand regalia, the colour, the money, the majesty, it brings back that belief. So anyone there would temporarily be drawn back to, yes, vive the empire kind of thing. But it's just a thin veneer. It's a brief peeking up of the head, which is soon going to go back down again in a sort of a slump depression, because we know that's Karl Joseph. And as we carry on, just think that this all parallels the Trotter's family as well. They are trying to hearken to the hero of Solferino, the militaristic, the pride. They're trying to live up to that. But when it no longer means anything, well, what does their family mean? What is there for their family? If the hero of Solferino's empire is gone, it means their family too is dissipated. I wouldn't say decimated, but diffused and having no meaning anymore if the empire collapses. And you can feel that's the loss that Karl Joseph is feeling, and by extension this is none other than Roth's own feeling. He did belong to an empire. He does remember nostalgically the sunny days when everyone was united, the parades, the pomp and the circumstance. But it's going, it's decaying. And I believe, he actually says, a last little comment on Frau Tausig and Karl Joseph. He says, was it anything more than a whim of hers to take him along like a little boy and show him a good time for a few days? Doesn't that sum up how the empire sort of held its vision, its ideal in front of its people to try and hold on to them, give them all this pageantry, but only for a few days, treating them like children? Now, I'm going to shift on. There's more that can be said about this, a lot more. That's a great point, but I've got no time to discuss it. Something for you to think of in your own time. He meets Moser, the painter, his father's friend. and quite seedy chap. And he says, he touches his, he doesn't know who he's talking to start with. He doesn't realise, Moser doesn't realise that it's Karl Joseph. And he touches his drawing pad and he says, I've got girls here in all sorts of positions, which is a lecherous, horrible thing to say, and I didn't like it. However, it has a point. Why why does he feel repulsed at that, but not repulsed at Frau von Tausig, who is married and has had umpteen liaisons with loads of men younger than she is? What difference is she to all these drawings of other girls in all sorts of positions? Why do they despise the other forms of governments, the social ideal, the social democracy? Right, in other words, Karl Joseph feels peasantry, but he's seeing the decline through rose-coloured glasses. He is really. He knows it's there, the decline, and that means he loses his place because his whole family is intertwined with the ideal of the empire, the hero of Solferino. So he has those great memories, and they're not terrible. They are a bit rose-coloured, but they're also happy days. The empire did bring people together to a degree, but yeah, he can feel it's dwindling, and as such, his place is dwindling. He has no meaning if the empire's not there, and he's already feeling it. And you feel that, don't you, all the way through, his desperation of not belonging. That's why he runs into the arms of Frau Tausig. He tried to avoid running into the arms of another woman, the doctor's wife, after the doctor died. He didn't want to be seduced by her, but now he's running to someone who stands for something. But just ask yourself, regarding this comment by Moser, how is Frau Tausig any different to the girls that he's drawn lewd pictures of? And when you think of how the Austrian Parliament felt about the other nations within its power, wanting to rule themselves, a different style of government, there would be different girls to other people, but they view them as somehow lesser, debased. But really, they are no better. They're like Frau Tausig. Maybe explore that in your own time. So that's right towards the end. In fact, that's 2 pages from the end of chapter 13, which segues beautifully into chapter 14. So, in chapter 14, by the way, remember, throw any comments in as you wish. So, again, check the first sentence of chapter 14 out. You will notice that Roth hasn't got a perfectly laid out hypothesis to this book. It's nostalgic. He's almost exploring his old world. He's fondly remembering it, wishing it back. But through his exploration, through his thinking, he's seeing its demise, almost the inevitability of that empire collapsing. And more pertinently, although it can't be discussed much in the book, is where is the world going now that this empire, which used to incorporate so much of Eastern Europe and Central, what does the future hold? Remember, this is 1932, right? So as a Jew, he knows all about the Nazis being a bit of a problem. And it wasn't just the Nazis that hated Jews, it was quite prolific in the Weimar Republic. So listen to the first sentence. Get your book out, chapter 14. Look at the choice of words. The day the lieutenant had to return to his garrison was a sad day. And, as it happened, rather a grey one as well. Again, beautiful choice of words. Why? What's in the mind of Roth when he writes this? Well, firstly, it doesn't talk about Karl Joseph, so it's impersonal. It's the lieutenant. He's still a cog in the machine. And it's a sad day. Hasn't he just been elated by the parade? Hasn't he just said the world's not ending? Didn't he have memories of the Radetzky March? And all of his childhood and early days in the army came back and he felt proud to be part of the empire. And yet, within a day, he goes home and it is a sad day. So that's a good example when reading literature of looking carefully at the choice of words that an author is using. But he then picks another word, which he's used a lot through the book, but is, again, a very important word to this author. He says it's a rather grey day as well. Again, when we go through, if you go through that section of the parade, the colours, the gold, the blue, the red, the yellows. Then there's the red sash of the emperor, and there's the glorious sunshine. Contrast this, he goes back, and it's a grey day. So it's like reality in the empire is a bit miserable, and reality in his family is a bit miserable. But without a sense of belonging, life is miserable. And here we sort of get a very much internal, we can take it away from the empire, as it were, as a study of empire, and sort of the elegy of the fall of Austro-Hungary. We can take it to a personal level, and it's nice to just watch. It's strangely satisfying and comforting to watch the troubles that Karl Joseph goes through. We feel as he feels, but he's struggling with meaning, and he comes out in the first paragraph of this chapter with the most interesting, and interesting is not a good enough word, powerful statement. He had obeyed ever since he'd been a small boy. Now he didn't want to obey anymore. He hardly knew what freedom was, but he felt it must be different from a holiday. So the empire has crushed everyone into a position. And although maybe in the past, because remember, Roth hasn't been totally against the empire, he's seen that it was a uniting force, that it did have some glamour, that it did have certain ways about it which were good, and maybe a more elevated standard of behaviour was there. Certainly a higher religious ideal, because its strength was the emperor was divinely appointed by God. But as people become more sceptical, if they start losing their belief in God, well, that undermines the emperor no end. But he's suddenly sensing, I don't belong. And people in the empire, their lives don't have any meaning. And ultimately in life, if you have no meaning, you have no belonging. And that's what he wants. That's what's important. He's ran to Frau Tausig because he wants to feel loved. But one senses that he's not going to get very far there. She'll use him and spit him out, I'm imagining. She may love him a bit, but I can't see it working out well in the end. And you get this idea. This is where there's a parallel drawn between Karl Joseph and the Balkan states, because there's a reference to people going south. And he says in the second paragraph towards the end, he says about the south, the southern states, they had their own monarchs, and these monarchs had their own people to rescue from mortal danger. It was bewildering in the extreme to follow these thoughts. And then he compares that to, well, it's as bewildering as thinking there are millions of galaxies with millions of stars with millions of planets, and we're just this, what does he call it? He says an insignificant speck of dust. Actually, the grand ideal that's been built up since youth, it's a veneer, it's not true. And there are people in different places who they're disenfranchised, and they want to have a king or a government from their area that speaks to their needs, that gives their life meaning, takes into account their way of living. And you can see that through thinking, Roth has realised this is what killed the empire. It became so detached and formalistic, and looked down upon its people, that it was doomed to break apart. You can't hold things together with a little clique of people at the top who they get meaning out of it, but no one else does. So there's a dooming in that sense. So that speaks to today quite a lot as well. What you're talking about here is a form, I'm not political in the slightest, by the way, I don't make political commentaries, but just a curious link. In the Habsburg monarchy, there is a form almost of globalism, because you've got all these states, but they don't view them as different kingdoms. They just view them as, different nationalities under one kingdom. And eventually that leads to people being disenfranchised, not belonging anywhere, and they want to push away. That setup is doomed to break apart at some point. Maybe a great ideal, and it may be held together by fanfare and distraction, but it will never ultimately work. So that was something I found interesting, just on a practicality of looking at it from today's perspective. Are there similarities in literature and history? To which the answer to that is yes. Going a little further, oh yeah, a very significant account. In page 224 in this book, sorry for those who don't have this edition, but it's about 4 pages on from where we just were. Do you remember the account of the workers at the brush factory? How they are brewing discontent. They are going to make a protest. And they're on the far reach of the empire, so they're disconnected to the reality of empire. They are not Habsburgian. They are not Austro-Hungarian, except in name. These ones are Polish, because that's where they're based, or Ruthenia, so Ukrainian as well. The brush factory, because they have a different idea, because their life is miserable in all that mud and at the edge of a wilderness, they want to be represented, and they are viewed as a threat to national security. That sounds very familiar today. And they're a threat to the ideal of empire, and those at the top of empire just trudge along, not able to change. And in a sense, it's like the fathers, it's like Franz with his son Karl. He's unable to change his way of approach to his son, and so there is a division, there is a breaking down of unity. The same is happening here. And I made a note about this. Yeah, it may be a threat to national security, but they have a sense of meaning. Because Karl Joseph is sent to be the battalion leader to suppress the rebellion. And again, it turns the military grandeur of Austro-Hungary into nothing, into nonsense really, when all you're putting down is a bunch of factory workers who make brooms. But just before he does it, he has this beautiful bit of almost poetic writing where he's standing behind the pyramids of rifles of his soldiers, and he's drilled them and he's just waiting now. He's wandered off, and he stands and he listens to the larks singing. And larks have a meaning in birds, so you might want to look up the meanings of the different birds in this book. Very interesting. The crickets chirrup, the mosquitoes buzz. He could see the coloured handkerchiefs of peasant women who were singing folk songs, and the soldiers suddenly joining in, calling out to them and joining in the song. And then it goes back to the larks and the crickets and the mosquitoes again, and he says he feels this sort of awe-inspiring silence where these sounds are sort of magnified the silence, and it is a grandeur. This is life. The winter of our discontent. Yes. Yeah, I like that. Plus, I love Richard III, so great choice of quote. It is a winter of discontent that he's in. And this moment when he sees the peasants and hears the sound of nature, life is beautiful. Life is worth living. We all feel that. These little details pull you right into the story. You feel alive. You know what the grand eternity feels like, to be stood on the edge of a vast ocean, feeling how tiny you are. But it gives you a sense of comfort, even though you're so small, a sense of place, that you are part of a stream of time. And then later, when he goes to the factory to put down this rebellion or protest, before that he goes into a pub, doesn't he? And none of the workers speak to him. And as he walks out, they all look at him, but there's a silence. And he says, the tune, oh, that's right, it's a silence, sorry, running ahead of myself. They then come outside at the factory and they begin singing and pushing. And Karl Joseph hears what they're singing, which is the Internationale, which is essentially your socialist song. It took Europe by storm, the raising up of the proletariat and all that. That idea was the Internationale was pretty much the socialist song for Europe, the workers' song. And as he could hear it, it says, the tune struck him as the musical equivalent of the silence he earlier felt at his back. That silence made him feel part of something, that we belong in a stream of time. And then hearing the Internationale, he realised these people belong to something bigger. They've got meaning. They're going somewhere. They're not to be despised, like they often are looked down upon because they're, different nationalities. They're not Austrian. You may be part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but there's a phrase every now and then, like Franz uses it, I am Austrian, as if that makes you better, elite. And he's like, well, he himself, he's not an Austrian, but he belongs to the Austrian army and has been adopted by their aristocracy. But he doesn't sense belonging. Yet these workers in a brush factory, they've got it. And to a degree, does that make you think about your own life? You know, not just conforming to type. I don't mean being a rebel, but finding true meaning. Something the classics always end up talking about is meaning, our place. What is the purpose of life? Most people go through life and won't even think about that until right towards the end. And that is a calamity in living, because we find that most of our life has been wasted while we haven't been thinking about what we should be doing with it. So Karl Joseph is having sort of this identity crisis, really, because he's supposed to belong to empire, but it's failing him. Now, is there any other bit that I've sketched down here? Just little touches. This is a bit disjointed now. It's not. It's just for you to ponder on in places. Did you notice when he got knocked down in the riot, he broke his collarbone, which is exactly what the hero of Solferino broke when he saved the emperor. It was the collarbone. And the realization for Karl Joseph was, actually, this insignificant wound that I just received is no different to the hero. My grandfather, really, that insignificant collar break, it was meaningless. It wasn't meant. And it led to some kind of promotion. Well, because of his activities, it says there would be an inquiry into his putting down the workers, and it says that ultimately the government would inquire into it, but they would ultimately honour the accused. That's Karl Joseph. So because he had done something which people complained about, but it was for the benefit of Austro-Hungary's government, ultimately he was going to get an honour for it. And he realises it was all meaningless, even my grandfather. Now, his grandfather may still hold some power over him, but not much. And this ends up leading him to finally being able to make the break and say, I am going to leave the army. He's like many of the army, have lost faith in Franz Joseph, the emperor. He just realises that the hero of Solferino, his granddad, is not such a big figure at all. There's no point trying to live up to someone else's standards, to an ideal that's been imposed upon you, which may not have meaning. You've got to find your own sense of place. And that carries on in chapter 15. Because you've got the emperor's story at that point. Maybe you make a comment. Did you find it interesting that Roth dropped into Franz Joseph, the emperor's life, and we got just a glimpse of the way he was seeing things? Of course, imagined, but he did have access to records of his day, Roth did. So I found it a very interesting little conversation that the emperor has in his own mind. And one of those points, goodness me, yeah, right at the beginning, about 30 lines in, you get this section where the emperor, being old, he just keeps himself to himself, his thoughts to himself, because there's this phrase, it's not right for an emperor to. So there's an expectation on the emperor to be something, to be the figurehead of the ideal, the representative of God, the appointed apostolic majesty. He becomes not so much a person as the embodiment of a principle. And so he can't be as clever as his ministers. It says it's not right for an emperor to be that. Then it says it's not right for an old emperor to show that he can see through deception. It's not right for an emperor to catch someone telling a lie. It's not right for an emperor to know that there are people smiling about him or prove a doctor is lying. This elevated form of societal hierarchy and behaviour and what's expected of a proper person has become ludicrous to the point that the emperor himself can't be an ordinary person. He himself is being crushed under the fatigue of a crumbling empire. Just the standards of it are horrible to him. And there's that really moving scene where one night when he's gone out to the extremities where he'll meet Karl Joseph, he's gone to see them doing their drills. he stands at the window. That was such a moving scene. He just stands at the window as an old man. He opens the window and he lets the night air come in. And for him, like Karl Joseph, he begins to contemplate the endless. He looks to, quote, the endless night. He listens to the chirping cricket singing to the endless night. He, before God's great majesty, before his creation, says he, a skinny old man. The emperor even sees through the facade. The emperor knows that the empire is dying. He knows people have had enough of it. The belief in his divine right has gone. Even he is sort of not believing in the divine right. He wonders whether God's interested anymore. And I think we mentioned in the last episode of this, there is that religious ideal, that spiritual ideal to this book, where the empire is founded in religion and it's got its own ways and paraphernalia, just like religion. And it performs its rituals just like religion. And it has its own central dogma, just like religion. But people have lost their interest in it. They've become skeptical. There is definitely here, Roth is making a social observation. I think he has equated the growing of skepticism in society at the end of the 19th century, I mean, it was a slow growth from 1850 up, to casting off God and the demise of a lot of the institutions. And there's a regrettableness to Roth in this. It would appear through these pages, because he has that rose-tinted view of empire. And he did see that it did bind people together, but you needed a belief in it. It did hold some form of stability to the people, but you needed a belief in it. And the peasants could live in the empire to start with, as long as they had belief in it. It's as they were beginning to be overlooked, and that belief was eroded, even amongst those who were at the top. There's a phrase in here about the simple beliefs. It's about Franz himself. It's about Franz Joseph. Perhaps a lesson on how the letter killeth, but the spirit giveth life. Okay, great quote. Yeah, what's that? The Gospels that you've quoted that from. So it's true. That's very right. I'm going to pick up on that. What a great quote. The letter of the ideal, all the things they have to do. Franz, the middle guy, Karl Joseph's dad, is the epitome of this. His micromanaged life, hyper detailed, hyper perfect, hyper bureaucratic according to the way of Austro-Hungary, is to the letter. It's the ideal, the epitome of refinement, of propriety. But it's stultifying. It completely crushes everything around him. But the spirit would be quite good. A practical orthodoxy, perfectly summed up. That's great, actually. A practical orthodoxy. So, yeah, so the spirit of it would hold things together. But people have sort of lost their belief in it. The emperor himself, I don't know if I underlined, he makes a few comments. God is even older than I am, and his ways are just as mysterious to me as mine may be to the men in my army. Great quote from him. Again, what's he saying? Well, God often is viewed as a mystery by some, and as soon as that relationship with God, as some say, brings meaning and belonging, when people have a belief but no relationship, it becomes a mystery and it loses its power. It's the same with him. He's lost his power. He's now just a mystery, this something that represents the empire. And because people are in the empire, they're supposed to feel a connection to it, but they just don't. So he feels like that. A bit later, he says something like he's lost the simplicity of faith. He's got the simple commands, but not the simplicity of the faith. And that's not about God. That's about who he is as emperor. And this idea of religiosity with the emperor comes up further in the book. There's the account where he meets the Jews. The Jews come along and they're talking away to him. And when he leaves, someone says, I didn't understand a word of what that Jew was saying. And the emperor says, never mind, he was only talking to me. And I think he says something else as well. I'll put this over. Where are we? He's only talking to me. I mean, that says a lot. It's like we only talk to God, the religious. So it's not for everyone's ears. The people are talking to me almost religiously, almost as if it's a private appeal, a private prayer. Again, putting this link between God and the emperor, telling us that without the divine right of the apostolic emperor, the whole empire is destined to crumble, destined to fall apart. And he even finds a problem in that when he wants to do his religious service, the emperor has to go to an Orthodox church because there's no Roman Catholic church, and Franz Joseph would be Roman Catholic. And so he has to sort of show a dual kind of worship, an interfaith, a watering down of the purest Latin Mass, I suppose you could think of it as. So everything in the empire, this is just a symbol of the fragmentation of what's going on. People have their own ways now, and they're not all bought into the same view, the same ideal. And right at the end, you have him say himself, the empire, he could see the empire dead and gone. So even the emperor knew. He says they're not interested in us anymore. And it just highlights, he comes down from being an appointed, divinely appointed emperor to an ordinary man, because as he's talking to in the last paragraph, to the different soldiers, and he talks to Karl Trotter as well at this point. Remember, it says everyone became fixated on the drip dangling from his nose, and then it finally dripped into his moustache and was gone, and everyone breathed a sigh of relief. What's that? He has become human. He's no longer divinely appointed, and he sees the end of the empire. The whole ideal is popped. And remember, try and relate this back. I can't do, I haven't got this all figured out or anything, because this book has certainly not got a single figured out. It's definitely an elegy to fallen empire. It definitely has the lovely view of the past. But Roth is exploring as well his own feelings towards what he has lost. He is exploring through this story, he's finding characters beginning to behave. I think they're leading him now, where he's finding, everything was doomed to fail, and this is why it went down. And it was inevitable, really. And he's found, almost by chance, this breaking of faith and skepticism has now ultimately done in. It's sort of like the termites eating through the roots of the empire. Once the belief in his divine right had gone, why would anyone be bound to him? They'd better off go to their own kings who can save them, the local people, from their own mortal dangers. So set up their own states, sort of the spread of democracy and the rights of the individual nations. So I found that chapter absolutely remarkable. There's a ton in that chapter, and it was just so well written as well. So I don't want this to go on too long now, so I'll just go to the last chapter. And there's just some it's the final talons hanging on by the fingernails to the empire, and the disbelief in seeing it go from those at the top. And this was part of the problem. Their inability to change meant there was no chance of ever saving this empire. And it ultimately propelled a load of people, not only into World War I, which was obviously terrible, but into a very uncertain future. Because long after, look at where Nazi Germany came from. This was the next 10 years after World War I had failed, and the place was still in upheaval, because all sorts of different forms of government were being thought of, because the old way had gone, the stability of Europe had gone under its old monarchies, and it opened the sluice gates of political thinking, especially during the First World War with the Bolshevik Revolution. And you look at the communists and the nationalists, socialists in Germany as an example. This was rampant after the First World War because times had changed. Everything had collapsed. In fact, I don't know if you know this, historians tend to classify the 20th century as beginning in 1918, when the war ended. or some will say in 1914 when the war began. But that's where the cut-off point is for history and the 20th century. A house divided against itself cannot stand. Yes, that's also from the Gospels. It's Jesus. Someone else got credit for that, but Jesus actually said it about the devil, I think. Anyway, that's a distraction. But the quote is really good. The house is divided against itself. All of these nationalities don't really belong to one state. They're all independent. But did you see it in chapter 16? Franz epitomizes the ruling elite attitude. Jacques, his faithful butler, has gone, and he tries to get a bunch of other people in on trial. Different ones called Karl and Franz and Alexander and Joseph and Christoph. And he says, but none of them would let me call them Jacques. Because if you remember, Jacques' name wasn't Jacques, but he ended up taking that as a name. And he wore it as a proud nom de plume, it said. But these other fellows, they're independent-minded. They won't be called Jacques. And so he doesn't like it. Now, they are very symbolic of the other nationalities. I think there's 17 nationalities under the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They no longer would call themselves Austrian. They wanted to go by their own names. And this was like mind-bending to Franz. He thought, you should just be proud that I give you any kind of sobriquet and that I let you serve in my house. And that's like the elite attitude to the other nations, the nationalities under them, was you should be proud to be Austro-Hungarian. Why do you want to be Serbian? Why do you want to be Bosnian? You should be Austro-Hungarian. And it's a brilliant little play out with Franz, how Roth gets that idea across of that strained mentality. And he talks about his shock that a man called Kak belongs to the Social Democrat Party and is allowed to be a corporal in the army. Like, this is scandalous to him. A bit later, he says he thinks the whole world's made up of Czechs. They're rebellious and stubborn and stupid, and they're probably responsible for the invention of nationalism. And then he says, as far as he was concerned, there were plenty of peoples, but no nations. There's only Austro-Hungary. There's peoples within it, but no nations. You see this stuck in the mud. Can't move on. It's only giving sort of a token amount of independence to some of its satellite states. And of course, that's what ultimately led to the bubbling in Serbia and Bosnia in particular. And was it the Black Hand was the nationalist movement. And of course, then Gavrilo Princip shoots Archduke Ferdinand and all hell breaks loose. Because they couldn't move. They couldn't understand why you wouldn't want to be Austrian, but instead you want to be your own nation. There's no such thing as other nations. There's only different peoples. And I thought that was very well captured. A couple of other little slight curiosities. He keeps talking about this nationalism was catastrophic for European Jewry. It was. Obviously, the epitome being Nazi Germany, but it wasn't just there that it was catastrophic. The main problem of nationalism for the Jews, in some respect, I'm no scholar in this area, but one of the big problems, I should say, for Jewry in Europe, especially with the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which did hold a bunch of peoples together, it gave identity, was when nationalism broke out, each nation broke into its own nation. So if you were Bosnian, you went into Bosnia. If you were Serbian, you became Serbia. If you were a Pole, Poland. Jews didn't have a land. So when nationalism strikes, actually all it did for the Jews of Eastern Europe was rob them of any place. They had no place to belong and were shivered backwards and forwards everywhere. So that was a disaster for them. And factor that in your reading. Roth was a Jew. So you can see why the Radetzky March, the anthem, the ideal of the empire, when it was at its height, when it bound everyone together, when it was something to be proud of, it was something to be yearned for Roth as a Jew, because he had to flee to Paris shortly after writing this because of the Nazi Party. The Jews actually lost any sense of belonging. And it didn't totally work out for all the other nations who became independent either. They still had their own problems. But what I found interesting as well was just Franz's attitude to his German maid, think it's a maid, I can't remember her name, Frau something, but she speaks High German, and he dislikes this. The relationship between Germany and Austria at this time, not particularly good. They were allies, of course, the German peoples, but what was it, 1878, I think it was, somewhere around there, you had the Austro-Prussian War, no, 1868. And the Austro-Prussian War took place because Germany became the more mighty power. It was a symbol again of Austro-Hungary on the decline. And the fact that he's got this maid who keeps popping in and out with him and speaks in her High German, he really can't stand her, but he still passes the time of day with her. It made me wonder whether that was just sort of a nod to the fact that Austro-Hungary thought of Germany as still beneath them, lesser than, but couldn't get rid of their influence and sort of despised it. Not saying that was actually the case, but with the story, but it just made me think. And then finally, there is a comment made by his friend, Skowronek, I think his name was, Dr. Skowronek in the chess, when he says, my son wants to leave the army. Like, oh, shock. And the doctor pretty much sums up the feeling of the day when he says, I think he's right. He should leave the army. And that's not what Franz was expecting. But Skowronek says, you can't bear responsibility for another human being. And that's powerful because that's what the emperor did. He bore responsibility for other human beings. They went into the army because that was the ideal, you know, to belong to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. You all took your place within it. But now there's this movement towards individualism, social democracy, nationalism, people looking for their own interests because they're disenfranchised from an empire that means nothing anymore. It's lost the divine right because of skepticism. And it's also become so hardened in its mechanical nature. Says of Franz Joseph in this, in one of the school books, he's not a romantic. He's by no means a romantic. And Franz Joseph thinks, oh, maybe I'm not a romantic, but I like campfires. He's a human, but the state has become a machine, which people no longer feel they belong to and gives them no meaning. So they're finding meaning elsewhere. And this is what Skowronek is saying to Franz. You can't hold the boy to an old ideal. And Franz goes in after this and he looks at the painting of his father, the hero Solferino, and it blurs and it won't focus and it's in and out. It's like the dissolving of his own faith as he sees the end of empire coming close. And right after this, Skowronek says about his children, if they disobey me, I just try to keep a modicum of dignity, and then makes this brilliant observation, which tells you, this comes right out of Roth's feeling himself. He says, they're still so young, my children. One of them's 8, the other 10. And when they're asleep, they have round, rosy faces. And yet there's cruelty in those sleeping faces. Sometimes I think it's the cruelty of their time, the future, that comes over them. I don't want to live to see that time. And Roth, of course, probably didn't want to see them live it either, or live to see it. There's a cruelty in those sleeping faces. There's a change. There's a hardness. There's a loss of simplicity. Someone made the comment in the Instagram group that there's this harkening back to simple life. Cassie and Bucks made this comment, and it was probably a few of you spotted it. Maybe under the empire it was a bit more simple, because Skowronek says that to Franz. He says they were simpler days. Every stone had its place then. You worked in this sort of clear-cut edifice. You had your part to play. Now that that edifice is crumbling, the pavements are all out of line, the rooftops are coming off symbolically, everything's getting dilapidated, people are finding their own way. And that makes you master of your own destiny and look out for yourself. And so he says his children look cruel in their face when they sleep, as if they're brooding on their own time. And you notice he said their own time wasn't now, their own time, the future. And it will be cruel and it will be destructive. And of course, that's exactly what happens in World War I. And the very final point I'll make to this, what year is all this taking place that we're reading? If I'm correct, going by Franz Joseph's own meditations, where he talks about his age and his regnal years, he says it's the 83rd regnal year. So he's been emperor for 83 years. Um, that would make him, not regnal year, it was his 83rd birthday. That would make the year 1913. So we're 1 year from war. And Roth maybe probably remembers this approach. He probably remembers the turmoil just before, because there was a lot of nationalist turmoil, and he probably felt it because he himself was in the northeastern part of the empire where Karl Joseph is right now, and there were uprisings there. So he feels it. So isn't it lovely or interesting and insightful to see how an author works out his own memories, works out his own conclusions, almost goes back in time and begins to see the cracks appearing, but also remembers fondly, especially as a Jew, that he did once have a place. But what you see in this book, if you don't find the perfect thread, like developing a very singular point, the reason is because Roth himself is being led by the story now. We are finding the musings of the guy in the characters. And for me, Karl Joseph is Roth's own mouthpiece. He feels as Roth did, losing his sense of place. But it's brilliant how emotionally being attached to the world he was once in, he brings up characters like Frau Tausig, who seems to picture the empire. You've got Franz Joseph picturing what the empire stands for, and you've got various other characters in the meantime as well, who all interplay and everything. Not every character means something, but we see life and the discontent and the confusion for those who could see it going down the pan, and their lack of belonging anymore. But especially, like was mentioned earlier, especially for the Jewry of Eastern Europe, this was a horrible time because you just lost your place altogether. And Roth clearly feels it because it comes out in the anguish and pain of Karl Joseph. So I'll stop wittering on now because I've gone on long enough. But there are a load of thoughts there. If there's anything you thought was interesting, go back and watch it. Maybe not the whole hour, but pick parts of it. But I hope you liked what we talked about, because I thought this was a good example now of why classic literature is so good. There is more than just a story there. It is a brilliant human story, but wow, it's got a lot going on behind it. This is how you get to weigh and consider the thoughts and arguments and perceptions of an author. You are having a conversation with Joseph Roth. He is telling you his experience, and he's asking you to listen to his conclusions. And then we can take them and weigh them up for ourselves and be built up in empathy and humanity by doing it. You don't have to agree with an author. So yeah, thank you. Comment later. By all means, Pauline, I love your comments, so please do. I'm sorry if I've overdone it, but I was a bit passionate. Thank you very much, guys. Tell us your names again. I always refer to you as the Elegant Couples Book Review, and I've forgotten both your names. I tried looking on your channel to see if you had an introduction video where you got your name, and I've lost it. So tell us your name, both of you. And I'm lucky because my name's in the title of my channel. So yeah, so I hope you enjoyed this, everybody. I'm going to stay on now for a bunch of minutes if you want to talk about anything, your own observations, because I may have not said something that you thought was important. Just sorry if I've chewed your ear off too much, but I was very enthusiastic about this. I thought those chapters were outstanding examples of great writing, and what writing can really be about, beyond just the story. But yeah, talk about anything. If you want to ask me questions about the book or questions about anything, I'm here to talk. Thanks. Oh, you're welcome, Suzette. I'm pleased you're back into the classics. And of course, don't forget, you are allowed to read things other than the classics. Sometimes you need a story just for a story's sake, and they do the world of good. But the classics, different breed altogether. You're You're having a conversation with history. Shant and Ava. Shant and Ava, thank you. I shall remember that now. Because when I comment on your channel, I always want to use your name and then I don't know. That's brilliant. Yeah. So anyone else got anything they want to talk about? Doesn't even have to be related to the book. I'm just going to hang fire. If you want to go, feel free to go because there's nothing more I'm going to say. Look out for the announcement. I hope to release the video tomorrow, if possible. There is a result. See you again, Shant and Ava. Thanks for joining. But I'll be announcing tomorrow the result of the poll for next month's first Classics Book Club book. Very exciting, and it was, wow, it was a nail-biting finish. It was a photo finish between two books, and off to finish the book now. Oh, hello, Cassie. Brilliant. Well, are you starting on chapter 17, do you mean now? 17 to the epilogue. Yeah, I'm itching to get into it too. I'm also currently reading Dostoevsky's The Idiot, and that's very good. Very good. So, yeah. I'm so pleased you guys are patient, because it's, when you're live, it's very hard to just continually talk and find stuff to say, like now. There's still 7 people on, and you're welcome to stay on. Oh, you're not kidding, Pauline. There is just an endless amount. There is, since it's been a video of quotes with people quoting in, here's one: to the making of books there is no end. In fact, that quote carries on: to the making of books there is no end, and much devotion to them is wearisome to the flesh. So there's a lot to be said for that. You know, there is time to spend with yourself and solitude, but to be deprived of good books and not to engage with them is to miss out on 1,000 lifetimes, really. Marion, you astound me. You mean you've sat through my inane ramblings for an hour and haven't read the book? You are amazing. I've got a whole bunch of your videos, by the way, that I'm trying to I've got to catch up on. It's been a pretty hectic few weeks, month, I would say, especially with doing this as well, because there's plenty in life that's already busy. But I love spending this time with you guys and sharing our love for the classics and digging deep. By the way, again, if you want to follow me on Instagram, there's a way you can message me there and give me ideas of how to improve the book club. So this is the dry run. It's not a book club yet. And with this dry run, I've just done it like this, where I talk and people can type in. Now, my nephew hated reading until I suggested he read Dostoevsky, and he was hooked. Dostoevsky. Wow, fair play to your nephew. Dostoevsky, let's face it, he's not the easiest read. But yeah, I can understand why someone would get hooked by reading Dostoevsky, because again, beyond just a story, he does not make you think. What I love about Dostoevsky, by the way, is as you read through a lot of his books, you see his own mental development. You see him change his own ideas, worldviews, ideologies. He actually changes through that, and you can track it through his books, plural. The Idiot, I find him very interesting. Crime and Punishment, wow, that's a wow. I've got to read Brothers Karamazov, because he actually finishes off an idea in Brothers Karamazov which he started in Crime and Punishment, and I thought that Crime and Punishment was exceptional. So yeah, but if you've got recommendations for me, by the way, on how to run a book club, because I'm not limiting it, I'm letting anyone come into it. I don't know how it will work because I don't want to charge people to come into it. But obviously it takes me a huge amount of time. But some people, you know, they want to get more out of the classics, but they can't afford to pay a subscription. So I'm in the middle of not knowing what to do there, but I want to keep it free. So, but if you could tell me how I could, if you've got ideas of how I could make it better than what we're doing now, then by all means say it to me. I don't take offense. If you give me a recommendation, I don't think, oh no, I'm rubbish. I just, I'm happy to have advice. If you've been on any other online book groups, tell me what you thought worked. Or if you just like it where I witter away like this, then all well and good. My only query about doing a Zoom with an indeterminate number of people is how can you have a discussion with that many people? So, yeah. Oh, thank you, Pauline. You're wonderful. And it's now 8:20 and your day is ready to start properly. Here it's 9:20 p.m. So thank you everybody for joining in. If you've got anything you want to ask just before I go, be quick to type. Otherwise I will sign off. Good morning. They are muted until you want to hear from them. Yes, that's true, Marianne. Thank you for that. I was just wondering whether it would frustrate people if there was, yeah, like you have them muted, but letting everybody have a say at some point. I'll see you, Marianne. Thank you ever so much for coming on. Really appreciate your support. You're wonderful. Well, to the 6 of you who are left on, thank you ever so much. Feel free to follow me on Instagram if you already don't, and tell me who you are. I'll leave, my Instagram is Tristan and the Classics. But instead of space between Tristan and the Classics, it's Tristan _ and _ the Classics. So yeah, carry on. Until the next time, I wish you joy in your reading.